Domestic product numbers have been released for the period of November. Preliminary information pointing to a 0.4% GDP rise in November. That's a look ahead. The numbers that we are seeing for October indicate as well a 0.4% increase in the Canadian gross domestic product numbers. And we have an expert guest now. We're going to speak with Veronica Clark. She's an economist at Citi, and she'll help us understand these numbers. Veronica, thank you very much for joining us. What is your early reaction to what we've heard? It looks like the number for October slightly ahead of the consensus call, but I think it is exactly what you were looking for, and that's a 0.4% month-over-month increase in October on Canadian GDP.
Yeah, that does match my forecast and just a bit above consensus. It's a bit slower pace than we've seen for GDP the last few months. But the most important thing really is just that activity is still rising. So this period especially is really the start when we saw cases increasing again and some renewed business closures and shutdowns. So the most important thing is that even though we had all of these headwinds to activity, we still have rising activity.
What do you think of the November call from Statistics Canada, also calling for a 0.4% increase in November? I know in your notes leading up to today, you said you were interested in that November call.
Yeah, definitely. And that's actually stronger than I would have thought it would be. We had the start of new closures in October, mostly in regions like Quebec, and then they started to spread into November. So we saw large cities like Toronto closing down even more. So to see that growth rate continuing, from October into November, that's a really positive sign for Q4.
What kind of handoff do you think is shaping up for the early portion of 2021?
Yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, at this point, we were expecting a Q4 slowdown, a couple months ago. If anything, Q4 now looks stronger than we would have expected. But that's kind of just pushing those expectations for a more substantial slowdown into Q1 of next year. So, I mean, we have had more restrictions. Of course, Ontario is going to have even more after Christmas Day. So we would still expect to see some softening in data. But now that is so consensus that I wonder if we'll get, more upside surprises like we saw for Q4 into the start of next year.
As we noted, your October call was a little more bullish than the consensus call, and you, the number matched your call this morning, 0.4%. Where do you think the strength came from in October?
Well, I would expect to see declines in things like food services and accommodations once I, dig into the report. I would hope that, things like construction or manufacturing are still continuing to rise. Construction especially, we've seen some pickup in jobs there. So a lot of these sectors that shouldn't be, as directly impacted by new closures, I would expect, continue to increase like normal.
What about the mining? We have seen certainly stronger commodity prices in the mining segment, very strong commodity prices in the lumber segment, and we've seen higher energy prices as well. Certainly stock market investors have seen that reflected in the share prices of companies that produce those commodities. How do you think that has flowed through to these numbers, and will it continue to flow through, delivering strength to GDP figures for the rest of this year?
Yeah, so the energy sector in 2020, of course, was hard hit. That's how Canada kind of got this double whammy in 2020. But we have seen, oil production starting to pick up again. And I base my forecast on our commodities team's forecast, and they kind of expect that to continue for next year. So even though we could see, slowing in services sectors, food services, accommodations, you could get more lift from, mining and energy sector into next year.
Yeah, we're actually seeing, I'm looking at some of the sector by sector numbers that have just been released today. We are seeing a 3.9% contraction in accommodations and hospitality. I believe that's the name of that category. Would that fit what you were expecting to see?
Yeah, exactly. And we should still see weakness there in November and December in the coming months. That's the sector that's most directly impacted by new closures.
And what role is played by government stimulus and government wage supports and supports to businesses?
Yeah, that's very key. And I think that's a key factor that, facilitated a really strong rebound in 2020. And it is a positive sign that, for the most part, small business loans, the wage subsidy program, unemployment assistance, it's all continuing into 2021. I mean, for the very near term, there's really not, government stimulus can't, support, people going out to restaurants. That's, of course, closed because of the virus. But that's more important for when we can lift these restrictions again and hopefully see a strong rebound in activity in the beginning of next year.
The strong lumber prices are being driven largely, as they always are, by strong housing activity in the United States. But we are seeing in the Canadian numbers that construction output rose by 0.7% in October. Is that a surprise to you?
Not exactly. Construction, I would also expect to see further upside. The housing sector for both the U.S. and Canada has been one of the fastest to rebound. And of course, we've seen home sales rising well above pre-COVID levels. So this quick rebound in demand, you have to see this rebound in supply also. And so you can really see further lift for construction over 2021.
Okay, again, now what kind of finish to the year are you expecting in terms of fourth quarter gross domestic product, and what kind of year are you expecting in 2021?
So for Q4 GDP, my forecast right now is for about 3% annualized. I would say even maybe with these numbers, there's some upside risk to that. Have to dig into the details some more. The start of next year will probably be soft, Q1, but expecting a pretty strong year overall, especially with the vaccine rollout. I think around 5% growth for next year.
How do you think these numbers will look to the Bank of Canada?
I think they'll be pretty encouraged by it. We already know that they've seen the Q4 data and it's been stronger than they initially expected, just like for most of us in markets. But just that strength is continuing and that November seems to be pretty strong also. I think that's just an encouraging sign that what they're doing is working for now.
And what about fiscal stimulus? Are governments doing enough to stimulate the economy?
For right now, I think all the measures that are in place are really what you can do right now. Just continuing the emergency support measures that were put in place this year, into 2021 is really key for right now. Once we get, fully to the other side of this and we don't have the risk of rolling lockdowns, I think then you can maybe look at the fiscal picture and say, well, is there any sector that needs more support, anything else we can do to help the recovery? But for right now, all the emergency programs, I think, are going to help support a rebound.
What about vaccine timelines? If we received here in Canada good news on vaccines, i.e. large quantities of vaccines arriving earlier than we now anticipate them, how significant would that be to your call?
Yeah, the vaccine rollout really is a key part of the growth forecast for 2021. The last few months or so, the vaccine rollout does seem to be even earlier than we expected just a couple months ago. So that is certainly a positive sign. If we can get many more people vaccinated by the middle of next year, that looks very good for growth in Q2, Q3.
That is Veronica Clark. Veronica, thank you very much. She's at Citi, and she helped us understand those breaking numbers. Canadian gross domestic product numbers come in stronger than expected, although right in line with Veronica's call. Thanks to Veronica Clark.